Hey guys, this is Graham. I am an author, illustrator, and truck driver in Oklahoma City. I am trying to get out of the truck full time and into the writing desk full time. You can help me do that by checking out my books on Amazon and watching this channel. Now on to the video. Welcome back to the Midnight Ride. I am feeling a little bit vindicated right here. I've dabbled in and out of comics over the time that I've been reading as an adult, but I was never a regular comic collector or reader until just about a year ago. There were some graphic novels I'd pick up every couple of months, but other than that, I'm not one of these diehards who knows all the names and the classic issues from previous years and such. I do recognize the name Alan Moore because I was always kind of a bigger movie fan than I was of comics, and a couple of his comics and graphic novels were adapted to film. And I've known throughout following kind of nerdy news and stuff through the periphery of it all that he's generally dissatisfied with the film adaptations of his work, and that he's also just this guy that has kind of crazy weird ideas. And I was like, all right, well, if I want to have a greater appreciation for some of these books and stuff, or some of these movies, I could probably do well to look up the books. In 2009, when The Watchman came out, I grabbed the book and I read it, and I had an appreciation for its complexity, but ultimately the point of the characters, and every character was at least three-dimensional. They had multiple facets to them and arcs that they would go through, but they were all just terrible, broken people. And ultimately, the point of that book ran contrary to why I read books and what I'm looking for in my entertainment, that is to be uplifted and inspired. The Watchman was really one of the first of those big successful titles to say, what if we took superhero characters and they all sucked? Because they did all suck. Like Rorschach he's since become this kind of libertarian icon because he was written that way in the book, and he gives you the cold hard truths. He's also a rugged survivor and a fighter, and in a lot of ways he's proven right. Like, he's a much edgier, harder version of Ron Swanson from Parks and Rec. And his famous line of never compromise, not even in the face of Armageddon. Like, okay, there's definitely value to that. What does it cost him in the end? It cost him his life. Granted, he's staring down Dr. Manhattan and he's not able to defeat him in physical combat. Pretty much nobody is. That's one of the dangers of Dr. Manhattan and the level of power that he has. But that's what Rorschach represented, was an ironclad beholdenness to his values. But he was also a bit of a nihilist and an accelerationist, and he cared a little bit less about brutally murdering people if he felt that they deserved it. The comedian, he was a guy that you do find some redemptive quality in him later on by the end of the book, but he was also a rapist. Dr. Manhattan, he's got the power to save the world, but his whole question is why? And I think that the way that that's phrased, at least there's an interesting exploration of that idea. In fact, Dr. Manhattan and Rorschach have a lot in common. They're both exploring the same question, kind of even in the same direction. Dr. Manhattan is saying, why would I save a world that I don't have a stake in? They don't want me there. My future isn't there. And Rorschach is saying, this world is bent on destroying itself and poisoning itself with sin and evil. And then when they're in the utter bowels of it all, they're going to look up at me and say, save us. And I'm going to look down and whisper and say, no. Neither of them has a stake in the world, and they've both been cast off by it until the world suddenly realizes that, hey, maybe these guys were right all along. Maybe we should have done it their way. And both of these characters were content to let the world just reap what it sows. That runs contrary to the values that I would hope that I would be able to espouse in that situation, where it's you've got to be able to forgive people and steer them in the right direction and help them get in the right direction, not just condemn them for their greatest shortcomings. Alan Moore wrote the same way when he wrote The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which I didn't even know was a book until I saw the movie in 2003. I saw it in the theaters, and it underperformed at the box office, but in fairness, it was up against some pretty stiff competition. That summer, Pirates of the Caribbean came out, and it just sucked up all the oxygen. There was a bunch of other stuff that came out that year, too, if I remember. Even the middling and the bad movies from back then were better than the middling and bad movies from now. And it was a little bit campy. It was a literary version of the Avengers. So it's just like, hey, let's put together a team of characters from European literature, and they'll go on a caper quest across Europe to fight a bad guy. Had a really good cast. I believe that was Sean Connery's final live action role. I think he did some voicing work before that, or excuse me, after that. But I enjoyed the movie for what it was. It introduced me to some literary characters that I didn't know of at the time. I'd never heard of Alan Quatermain before. I knew Jekyll and Hyde were, and Dracula, and they put Tom Sawyer in the movie. He wasn't in the book. I finally got around to trying the book a couple of years ago. I could not finish it because it had the same problem that Watchmen had. Every character sucked. And there was also, again, a lot of rape in the book. He's got this weird thing where he writes in a lot of aggressive, violent rape, and then it's presented casually. And it's one of those things that I was like, well, this is my standard. I'm going to set this aside. This is going to fall into the category of, wow, like mainstream comic readers must like this because obviously it's popular and successful. I don't like it. I'm not going to get on board with it. And it feels like just recently more people are getting vocal in the comic space about how, no, Alan Moore sucks. Like, why was he popular? Well, he was popular with a prior generation, but his work is obviously not timeless because more people are coming around to the fact that he's not writing characters that are inspiring at all. They have a couple of redeeming qualities here and there. But other than that, these are just terrible people doing terrible things in terrible ways. And to what end? Like, what's the point? It's the rare case where, at least in the instance of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, for my mileage, like the movie was better than the book. As for The Watchmen, I still haven't seen the movie, and I probably won't because the book was bad, and then the movie was directed by Zack Snyder, and he's capable of doing like one thing. Let's be angsty, gritty. Let's say that we're evoking the classics. Let's shoot a whole bunch of stuff in slow motion, and then that's it. Like, I gave Man of Steel 3 stars, even though I think it is the best standalone Superman movie. I just don't like Zack Snyder's work. He's not a good filmmaker. That's why nobody's giving him contracts anymore outside of Netflix, and they'll greenlight your mom to make a movie. Anyway, the point of all of this is to say that while I generally avoid negative reviews, I have not had positive experiences reading Alan Moore's work, and I've been hesitant to be vocal about that. I think I mentioned that League of Extraordinary Gentlemen book when I was doing the podcast back in 2019, and probably just mentioned it in passing. But looking back now, I feel like, well, okay, there's a difference between like avoiding a generally negative review versus like, being open and honest about why. I think the standard for a bad negative review for me is always going to be the anti-lit RPG rant. It's the reason why I haven't done that since. I'll still talk about a book that's bad and why it's bad and what I would do differently as kind of a writing exercise or an exploration, but not as a way to kick up drama or stir up algorithmic responses or anything, because again, like, what is the objective? My objective is to be authentic, to do what I would already be doing, and then sometimes point a camera at it. Sometimes I read really bad books, and out of those times when it's relevant or beneficial to explain why, I'll do that here. And I think in this case, Alan Moore is just a nihilist, and that's why I don't like his books. That's why I've never understood why they were popular. To each their own, but that's that. I'll cap this off with a discussion of a thread that was on X this week, where people were comparing, fans of Game of Thrones to fans of Lord of the Rings, and how you can tell what kind of person you're talking to based on which they think is the superior work. And yeah, there are going, oh, well, I know people that are fans of both. Yes, yes. Okay, we understand that they're different things. We understand that there's a circle in the middle of the Venn diagram. The point is that if you're in the binary of people think that this one is good and this one is bad versus the opposite, what are you dealing with? And there are obviously, like, I'm going to be in the Lord of the Rings camp because there's greater profundity to what Tolkien was writing about. It was dealing with the natural man in his most natural state, but also finding aspirational themes to elevate above that natural state. The Silmarillion is a story of the fall of the elves. It's also a chronicling of the foothold that evil was gaining in the world of Middle Earth. It was very plain about how it discussed evil and very plain about how it discussed righteousness. Yes, the protagonist still had hurdles to overcome, but it was ultimately about good overcoming evil in the best way that it could, and the cost that they bear, versus Game of Thrones just being that everybody sucks and is a nihilist, and anybody who tries not to suck and be a nihilist gets killed. And then the story will never end. George R.R. Martin will probably never publish another book in that series, and if he does, he will never finish the series. Game of Thrones, The Song of Ice and Fire, the books will never be finished. And what is the point of that series? What is the theme of it? The theme is that everybody sucks and is evil, that is the natural state of man, and that it's so completely pointless to even try to stop being evil that you might as well give into it and just take as much power as you can. And we're not even going to examine whether that's good and right or whatever. It's just take what you can get and bone your sister along the way. Like that's George R.R. Martin. He's like, oh, well, I'm writing what Tolkien couldn't write because I'm examining, like, well, what would Aragorn's tax plan be? Would you hunt down all the baby orcs and kill them too? It's like, you really missed the point of what he was writing then, if that's the case. He's found his audience. That is what it is. That's why I never made it past the first Game of Thrones book, though. It's why I never got into the series. I don't find what he was writing about to be good. Even if he was writing some intriguing characters and plot twists along the way and similar developments, like whatever. What was the net result of what he was writing? Wasn't for me. I don't think it was good. And I think it's okay if I mention that every once in a while around these parts. Ultimately, my goal is still to find what is good and what I think that you could enjoy reading, and that's what I'll review here. Till next time, drive safe, etc., etc. Hey, thank you for watching that. Did you know that I'm also an author? You can check the description for a link to my book, Mr. Friday. It's set in a future where Black Friday is militarized and televised, and the best Friday fighters end up getting sponsors and backing, but it just so happens that the very best of them actually wants to take the holiday down. When he's approached by a couple of other like-minded fighters, he jumps at the chance, and it goes haywire from there. This is a short novella, and it's available in ebook format for just 99 cents. Drive safe. See you out there.